Tri-Cities Community Television was at the Executive Plaza Hotel in Coquitlam for a community open house as part of the Renewing Riverview visioning process hosted by BC Housing. The Renewing Riverview initiative was announced in 2013 by the province of BC as a visioning process to identify potential future uses of the Riverview lands based on a set of guiding principles that balances community, government, and economic stability. This was the fourth open house in the series as part of the land use planning process to collect and share ideas from the community. The fourth open house featured a panel of experts covering major themes on mental health and wellness, complete communities, and economic sustainability. It was followed by an open mic session with general questions, concerns, and comments from the audience.
Some of the principles that we've used to help inform our visioning work to date were set out at the onset of our visioning process about 18 months ago. And we first and foremost set out to have a balanced vision. We wanted to give a voice to all the stakeholders and all the interested parties that have a role in Riverview and an interest in Riverview. And I think we've been very, very successful to date, given the diversity of the folks here tonight, in reaching out to the community and inviting that participation. One of the other commitments that we made right out of the gate was that we're going to be very, very respectful of the Riverview lands. And we made a commitment to respect the degree of open space that is currently on the site today. A lot of people had concerns about the heritage tree collection and some of the gardens. And BC Housing said, we're going to protect those areas. They're important to the site, they're important to the community. And we set a guiding principle going forward that we're going to respect the degree of open space that exists today at Riverview. One of the other guiding principles for those that haven't been following the whole process was to reach out very early on with our Coquitlam First Nations partners and seek their input into the site. They have a long-standing history with the lands in the area. They were identified as the First Nations with a prima facie interest in the lands, and they're entitled to their own consultation process, as all First Nations are around the province. We're pleased that we've started a very productive dialogue with them. The other commitment that we made was that this is going to be a fiscally responsible and sustainable development. And we set out upon to set a break-even mandate for the project, that all revenue that we would generate off the site would be captured and reinvested into the property to support the renewal of some of the heritage buildings, develop social programs, arts and culture, public amenity spaces, those things that would come out of an official community plan as ultimately approved by the City Council. We built a lot of trust over the process. I think there was some concern about BC Housing's initial role in the project. We would not have the relationships to date, and I don't think our visioning work would be as fulsome and complete as it is today without the cooperation and the work of some volunteer stakeholder groups that are very, very important to this process. The Burke Mountain Naturalists, the Riverview Horticultural Society have been our ecological stakeholder advisors. They've met with us regularly and given us some excellent feedback in what's important to the site. We've also have Tri-City Chamber of Commerce as our economic advisory. This stakeholder group elevated their role to the BC Chamber of Commerce, so it's had a very broad review by this organization. And then lastly, our social stakeholder is the Tri-City Housing Homelessness Task Force. And they put a very, very thoughtful proposal forward. It's just one of many possible outcomes for the site. As far as next steps go, tonight is the fourth open house of potentially 5. In the fall, we will have a draft vision document that gathers all the feedback that we've received to date, including this evening's discussion. That will be captured into a draft visioning document and be brought back out to the community for discussion once again before it goes to City Council for endorsement, with the opportunity to comment and provide feedback, further feedback on the visioning document at that time.
I thought commendable that BC Housing is putting the pressure on itself by using this term, complete communities, because it's a pretty easy term to throw out there, I found, but a pretty hard term to realize and actually accomplish. Every city wants complete communities these days. I myself have been involved in a handful of city plans around the world that are all calling for complete communities. And And I like that. That's not a criticism that we're all starting to use the same language. It's actually a good thing because we all are increasingly understanding what success looks like when we're talking about how to do our communities, frankly, better than we have been in the past. So if you want to stand a chance of having a complete community in Riverview, I think it's going to take a lot of rethinking from what we've normally been doing in contexts like this. Rethinking how to do density better, rethinking what an edge community means relative to an urban community, rethinking what highest and best use normally translates to in an economic analysis, sir. Sorry, I couldn't help that. And rethinking how we think about land uses, how we design streets and places, and from a political and community perspective, rethinking this concept of not in my backyard, because in essence, in a complete community, everything is in your backyard.
So I'm going to just go through a little bit sort of what the notion of break-even that's being used here is, and then basically show you a couple of implications of that and what it means. And the break-even mandate is essentially saying, gee, we're going to leverage this off the asset that we have, which is the site, that some amount of development is going to have to take place on that site in order to make this happen, right? It costs money to create parks, it costs money to create subsidized care, it costs money to provide non-market housing, it costs money to do heritage preservation. And the source of the revenues in this particular context is the market development of the land if we're imposing this break-even criteria on BC housing.
Test the question, which is, if you were to provide them with market housing opportunities in otherwise intact communities, I don't want to say complete communities, but otherwise established communities, and provided them with support to live in those market accommodations, would that work? Well, I can tell you that initially there were all sorts of reasons given why this was a really bad idea. There would be a NIMBY backlash. People would crash and burn. They've been homeless for 10 years after all. We're setting them up for failure. You'd never get the places in the first place because we're coming up to the Winter Olympics. People are planning to rent out their places for a profit. The occupancy rate is vanishingly small anyway. It'll never work. And we found out that none of those forecast impediments were a reality. So indeed, people were housed rather swiftly. They moved in. Very few encountered problems in their residences. And about 100 of these people were previously patients in Riverview Hospital, and in various ways transitioned out of the hospital into circumstances that clearly didn't meet their needs. So a couple of lessons just from this research, which is now 4 years into following the 500 people that we started working with. One is that the process of recovery needs to be looked at over the course of the lifespan, and that individuals over the years have more opportunities for recovery than had previously been considered. That was part of the naysaying that we heard initially was that we need to focus on institutional care, not community care. So it was really selling people short. It was also failing to recognize, and this is something that we learned and a number of other cities around the world have undertaken now similar research, that for people experiencing mental illness and recovering from mental illness, the communities that they live in are powerful components of the overall intervention. And I think most people who reflect on where they live and how their neighborhoods matter recognize that that's true for all of us, and no less true for people with serious mental illness.
I'll probably start there and talk about best practices. And the best way to talk about best practices in mental health is to think about it and contrast it to best practices in cancer care. And when you think about it, and I've had personal experience, and I'm almost thinking that most everyone in this room has had personal experience with cancer. From diagnosis, you get immediate treatment, you get world-class treatment, you get effective treatment most of the time, and support along the way. There's no stigma, there's no discrimination in that process, and you feel fully supported. And I would suggest that we're not at that, if you want to use that as a gold standard in mental health care. It's rare that you get diagnosed quickly. It's sometimes very hard to find treatment. It's often loaded with stigma, and so that it may impede you or your loved one coming forward for help, but also may jaundice whoever's trying around you, so that that support erodes. And then access to effective treatment. For some people, the treatments aren't really good and work very well and very effectively and go on with their lives. For many, and actually probably we talk about Riverview, are people where there's actually a partial recovery. The treatment's okay, but there's still remaining symptoms of mental illness, of their psychiatric condition. In my work at Coast, we work with people with a psychiatric condition, but most of the things we're working with are dealing with the major symptoms of mental illness. And the number one symptom of mental illness is abject poverty. People are so poor that they have no choice in life. They have between $600 and $900 if they're on disability benefits of income to live on. They have $375 a month for shelter, which allows them to buy pretty well, hardly anything in the downtown east side now. And other than that, it's going to be BC housing or some supported or subsidized housing, or you're on the street, or you're on a wait list, or you're couch surfing. You have very little.
Riverview is also about streams running through it and so on. So if you're going to develop this, how are you going to do that without protecting the trees? Who is speaking to protect the trees and the heritage buildings?
I would like to see Riverview be a community for these people, with a community as far as working, training, schooling, farming, industrial, but mainly the focus for the mentally ill. And I would like this money to come from the government. It is after all health care, and it should be supported.
But I worked for about 20 years at Riverview. The majority of the time as medical director of the research unit, which is called the Refractory Psychosis Unit, and which lives on in the BC Psychosis Program at UBC Hospital. To be quite honest, I love the place. I thought I saw people transformed in good ways.
I say very loud and clear to this government, there will be no residential housing on this 244 acres. Your buzzwords aren't engaging the people that value what we have here. Would residential housing in Stanley Park be tolerated? No, and it won't be tolerated on the Riverview lands.